Welcome to the Power Lunch live on LinkedIn. I'm Rhett Power, your host. We do this program Monday through Friday around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time every week. The point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, CEOs and founders, thought leaders, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from, so we can get better at what we do. And so that's the reason we do it. Now, the fun part about that is that the show can be interactive, and it can only be that way if you ask questions. So please do ask your questions of our guests. It's a way for you to learn what you want to learn and get the information you want to get from them. Now, you can do that on all of our platforms because we simulcast on LinkedIn, of course, but we also simulcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and probably others. And so on any of those platforms, you can ask your questions and we will try to answer them. If we don't do it during the show, certainly after. Now, if you like the program, give it a like or share so your network can benefit from those conversations that we have. Now, my guest today, I'm really excited to talk to AmyAnn Cadwell. She's the co-founder and the CEO of The Good Trade, which has grown as a platform with over 50 million followers and conscious consumers. AmyAnn, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. I want to dive into the conversation about The Good Trade. And this was a side project or a side hustle, I guess you'd call it, if that's my understanding is correct, when you were in grad school. And did you ever imagine that it would grow into what it has grown into?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not at the beginning, certainly. So a little bit of backstory. I moved to Los Angeles to study social entrepreneurship and sustainability in grad school. And before moving to LA, my husband and I had a blog platform in Kansas City where we were living at the time. And it was like local restaurant reviews and that kind of thing. And so we sold the publication. It was very much just a hobby. He was working in advertising. I was working for a law firm. We sold it when we moved to LA. We felt like it'd be a little disingenuous to keep up a local Kansas City blog from LA. And so I found myself in grad school. I was working for the university where I was attending, and I really just had this desire to get back into digital media and create content again. And so the conversation around sustainability and social impact became a really natural place to start another platform.
Yeah, makes sense. And why that topic? Was it something you were passionate about, or?
Yes, certainly. I mean, during my graduate school studies in social entrepreneurship, I was exposed to this way of thinking that really required more of businesses and companies than just merely existing to maximize shareholder value. And so I was exposed to this way of thinking, but also companies and organizations that were doing better by both people and the planet, and really considering the impact of the communities that they were touching throughout their supply chains and ultimately their consumers as well. And so at the time, the conversation felt, fairly academic, like not extremely accessible. I personally didn't know where to start to kind of change my consumer behavior and my lifestyle kind of habits and decisions to really more closely align with my values for fair trade labor practices and sustainability. And so the conversation really kind of started out of our own curiosity about the topic.
What is, let's talk about that first before we get into the Good Trade and some of that. What, do you think today that companies are being forced to sort of think about these things by the consumer, or do you think it's conscious entrepreneurs like yourself that are driving it? I mean, what do you, it seems to me there's some sort of monumental shift going on, right? I know growing up, you had my parents, for example, probably were loyal to certain car brands and certain grocery stores and certain things, but that doesn't seem to be there anymore. And what do you think? I mean, what's your crystal ball on where this is all going?
Yeah, well, I certainly think consumers have started to demand such a higher level of transparency. And I think this started in the food movement. You started to see, 5, 8, 10 years ago on a more collective level, people being interested in farming practices, kind of that farm to table conversation started happening, and consumers were really genuinely interested to learn the story behind what they were actually consuming, like physically into their bodies. And I think it's become a much more corporate conversation that hundreds of billions of dollars of profit are generated each year at the hands of laborers who work in fairly unthinkable conditions. And this is a product of globalization. This is a product of mass consumerist consumption. We've just really accelerated the way that we consume things from 30, 50 years ago. And so, along with that acceleration, there's been a real, I think, awakening and interest on the part of consumers that is definitely changing the conversation at a corporate level, for sure, because consumers are using not only their wallets and their dollars, but also their voices to ask, like, who made this product that I'm about to wear or bring into my home, in what kind of condition, and they're demanding to understand that story more clearly.
Do you think it's because of sites like yours?
I think we have grown up alongside of the conversation. So we, early on, I focused my graduate work on more the farming side of things. So like coffee and tea and chocolate and all of that. And then we started publishing on fashion on the site. This was in the first year of the site. And talking about, fair trade labor practices within the garment industries internationally. And that content just like took off. And so that, I think the conversation, is being turned up in these different categories, but holistically, I think that there's this massive interest on the part of consumers that we've been able to, kind of grow alongside that conversation and even follow the reader's interest about which area of their life they're more willing to adapt and change first.
It seems to me that, I think I have to give you more credit than that. You're being very modest, because I do think that people have access to more information now, right?
Yeah.
And so it's forced companies to do this, but I think it's sites like yours that give that information, that inform and help people make informed decisions. And I think I think you should take more credit, because I think it is sites like that have helped actually drive the conversation and forced it maybe faster than they would have. And
I
just open people's eyes. You open people's eyes to what's better, I guess. Who's doing it the best.
Yeah, I think that storytelling has such a powerful and important place in this whole conversation. So even for me personally, when I was in graduate school, I watched the documentary, The True Cost. It's on Netflix. It's very accessible for anyone who's interested in learning more specifically about fast fashion and kind of the issues around climate that are happening with our throwaway culture and fashion, and the labor issues specific to that industry. That story alone just, deeply impacted me and deeply impacted the work. And I think similarly on the grid trade, we're looking to tell those stories that actually change the way that people think about how they live and what they're doing. And then also, as you're saying, like having specific actionable resources for people really accelerates change. And we've learned that our audience responds to really well-researched, actionable content that is accessible to them right where they are. Like they don't have to take 10 steps. Let's just look at the one step that can be taken kind of right where someone is sitting that's contextual to their lifestyle.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I think this conversation, I was at a venture capital conference last week, and I was having a discussion about consumer habits and consumer buying habits, and somebody chimed in, well, that's easy for you to say. You come from a rich country, you come from it's great if you can be a conscious consumer and such, and I thought, there's a point to that, what they're saying, but I also think that it's easy to say, well, not everybody can participate, but because I think that they can. I think it's harder maybe if you're on the other side or if you struggle financially, or if you're limited by a budget. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how can we all participate in this change that's happening?
Yeah, I think that's such a very important part of the conversation. And it was feedback that we received from our readers really early on. And we started having this deepening dialogue with our audience about, the accessibility and inclusivity of the entire conversation around consciousness, was not a diverse or inclusive conversation 5 years ago. And it is progressing to be. But one of the main kind of massive, I think, shifts that's happening right now is a consumer leaning towards secondhand goods. So you're seeing that happen in fashion. There's this rapid growth in the market in secondhand fashion. You're also seeing it in the like home goods categories, other categories as well, where the both rental and then purchasing secondhand are price accessible and also convenient ways for people to essentially be much more sustainable, to keep things, to extend the life cycle of a specific product is ultimately much more sustainable than even buying a new, quote unquote, ethically made good. And so that's a really exciting kind of large corporate movement that's happening in just consumer preferences and interests that I think aligns to this conversation really well. The other part of the conversation too is a conversation around minimalism and simplicity, and really kind of considering, like, is the amount of things we think we are supposed to have in our lives, does it actually benefit us? Is it actually sustainable for the planet? The answer is no to that. But really thinking about, like, are we actually better off if we have less things? If we buy, one piece of clothing that's well made instead of the fashion model that might be like multiple items that you would have to, throw out after a few wash cycles. So that just slower approach to consumerism is also accessible for most people.
Yeah, I was very, very excited. You can tell by the way I dress that Patagonia opened that resale store out in Denver the other day.
Yeah, and a lot of the really thoughtful companies, Fisher is doing the same thing. A lot of the pioneers of the early ethical, sustainable fashion movement are now doing really cool things with buybacks and resale of their clothing to extend the life cycle of those garments to ultimately, serve many more people for a much longer time.
Well, and they make such good clothing, right? It's
worth keeping around.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, no doubt. What are some steps? Because I want to dig into that a little bit more. I think everybody wants for their families and for themselves to eat healthy, to really be conscious about what they're doing, what they're buying. Are there any other sort of concrete things that people can do on a daily basis to learn? Number one, where do they go to learn about their food or their clothing? Or are there some other great sites? Are there some great places on your site to go? Who should they be reading? Where can they shop? Those kind of things. Just some tips for people to sort of start thinking about this.
Yeah, I think finding resources is a really great step. So I highly recommend The Good Trade as a resource for people. We do have excellent databases on most consumer products. So like from shoes to sheets to, a lot of different types of things that you might bring into your home. We've done the research on what brands do we think are doing a good job on ethics and sustainability and why. And so there's also an app called Good on You, which I highly recommend. And then the New York Times has specific verticals. So they have like a sustainability newsletter. They have other verticals that are very focused on like quick, easy kind of steps. So things like, they'll send out a newsletter that's like, this week, turn your washer machine on cold instead of hot, and you will save X amount of energy. Just like really practical kind of free tips. So they're a great resource as well. But I think in terms of practically, the way that I like to think about it is, first of all, buy less. So do I really need this thing that I think I need? Second, can I buy it secondhand or can I rent it? Is there a good option for that? And third, when I do buy new, buying for quality and, really asking questions about the values of the companies that you purchase from. So I think an important part of this conversation is that there really is no such thing as an ethically infallible choice or a waste-free choice. You're always making some type of trade-off. So determining your own framework for what is important to you is really valuable. For me, I like to buy from companies that have female leadership and diverse representation, especially in fashion or especially in a product that's being made specifically for women. I like to see female representation. And so that's important to me, along with environmental sustainability and labor issues. For some people, we have a lot of vegan readers, so it's extremely important to them that there is no animal byproduct or animal testing in their product. So, kind of like, we all can't do it all. I think we have to determine what's important to us and what aligns with our sense of rightness and ethics, and then approach the conversation from that perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Absolutely. So you started The Good Trade. You're in year one. I know that feeling of being in year one. How did you get to know the audience? How did you know what content they wanted? Because some of that's just a mystery, right?
Yeah.
And talk about that kind of process that you went through, because I think this is unique in the sense that you're talking about a platform, for information and trying to educate people on things. That's a hard thing to get off the ground. I mean, you look at all the platforms out there, all the media out there, how did you cut through that noise? Because there's a lot of noise out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about digital media is that analytics plays such an important role in shaping, like, what is our audience actually interested in? How are they moving across our site? Where are they exiting? Where are they entering? What is the time on site for the fashion vertical versus the home vertical? All of that is real-time data that we get to optimize around. In the first year, we relied really heavily on Instagram comments and comments on the site. And that was a place where we really deeply got to know our reader and our follower and engage in a dialogue, and I've learned through the 5 or 6 years of this, when you have 1 or 2 people reach out and say, like, hey, I really like a sustainable clothing guide for petites, like petite people. Right. And what are brands that I can, find for that? When we listen to that, the people that kind of reach out directly end up being representative of a much larger group of people almost all of the time. And so really paying attention to that conversation that we're having with readers has been a through line through all of the years that we've been publishing. We also leverage like social listening tools and keyword research. And a huge part of our differentiation as a women's lifestyle brand and media company is that we take a very slow approach to our content. So we do a lot of research before we publish any particular piece. We go through multiple rounds of edits. We make sure that the content we're producing is something that our readers are actually interested in reading before we do the work to create that piece of content.
Right. And it's not just thrown up there like a lot of other platforms do, right?
I think not to be too harsh, but I think in the women's lifestyle media, landscape, the content strategy is like throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. And that is so counterintuitive to how we feel is an authentic way to build an engaged community. It should be that we're in a daily dialogue with our readers and our audience to inform our content strategy, rather than like this like top-down kind of quantity over quality approach.
What so I like the thought on that, on how you sort of use the analytics and the engagement with the audience to continue to grow. Has that changed? Is that sort of informed you on and allowed you to pivot, or is that said, okay, you've looked at that data and said, well, we need to do, I mean, obviously you've listened to that and you change with what your audience wants.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely in the content verticals, so where we see people engaging, that's where we continue to create content around specific questions that we're getting from our readers, but also in the platforms themselves. So, being in the digital media space, we certainly rely on organic search for readers to come to our site. We also rely on social media channels to drive our followers to our content. But we've been very careful not to be over reliant on those channels because algorithms are changing all the time. There's certainly like really valid concerns about social media itself and the landscape of that. And so one of the ways we've also pivoted kind of based on this data and based on what our readers are wanting is to really build out our newsletter channel. So we have over 100,000 subscribers that subscribe to our daily newsletter channel. That channel is extremely highly engaged. We edit it frequently, so we've had several 100,000 people come through, but we remove inactive subscribers. We keep that channel like really tight and really highly engaged. And that's a way that we can reach our readers on our terms in our time without depending on algorithms. And that's been an amazing way that our readers have kind of indicated to us like where they want to connect with us, and we've been able to build in that way.
How did you monetize the site?
Yeah, so we do branded content with advertisers that share our values and share ethics and sustainability. And that's been such a fun part of the job because that's an exciting way to bring a creative lens to what has been in the past, maybe brands that didn't have as much of a focus on aesthetic. They were very focused on like the ethics and sustainability. And so we've gotten to kind of help evolve their brands in a way that makes them really palatable and exciting to our audience. And so that's been a very fun part of the role as well.
Yeah, I bet. Now you're doing some angel investing now.
Yeah, I do.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so part of that came out of the journey with the Good Trade. So we decided not to raise for the Good Trade. For one, it's not a capital intensive type of company. It's not that expensive to set up a website, and we've been able to grow our team organically as the company has grown. But in all honesty and transparency, part of the reason why we didn't raise is because 2.2% of venture went to women last year, to female-founded companies. And I think, through the years of this, I've looked around, and when I've looked at venture capitalists, I've not seen myself. I've not seen, and of course, there are people that share my values and that type of thing, but it is not the mainstream. And so that was a part of our decision not to raise, and has been. And so I think I've started angel investing, really modest amounts of financial investment, but I have come alongside companies with minority-led founders or underrepresented founders. I've come alongside these early stage companies with the experience that I bring in digital media. And of course, I'm looking for a financial return, but I'm also looking to support and defend their social mission and their commitments to sustainability. And I think that's something 5 years ago, when I looked at the landscape, I didn't see that for myself, and I didn't feel like it was an option to raise and have someone kind of, defend the real substance with me of the vision that I had for the company. And so it's a really, really exciting part of my day-to-day. On the angel side, I learn so much from the companies I'm involved in, and they get to learn from our data and get to learn from what I've learned through my work in digital media. And I think the VC angel landscape is changing for the better in a really exciting way right now.
Can you talk about any of those companies?
Yeah, sure. So one of the companies that I really enjoy talking about is a tea brand. I love tea personally, and that's something that the companies I invest in, it sounds maybe intuitive, but in the VC and angel world, it's actually not that common to actually love and use the product yourself sometimes, and that's kind of a baseline for me. So the brand is called Thomps, and it's a Canadian-based brand, and they are taking an approach to really clean teas, and ethical sourcing and thoughtful sourcing, and it's actually quite concerning, the amount of pesticides and other types of unfriendly ingredients that are used not only in tea itself but in the packaging, so in the sachets and so that's the product. Their brand, Thomps, is really about taking a moment for true wellness. And what is that idea of wellness that is not about, how you look, but actually about how you feel. And so they're doing a fantastic job. They also have a give back element. They support artists and have a really cool mission there. But they're a fantastic company, and it's exciting to kind of watch them grow and evolve in their journey.
And are you helping mentor and sort of work with them on their digital strategy and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, exactly. So, the first year that I've been involved, it's a monthly call to hop on the phone and talk about really their brand positioning. So kind of that wellness differentiation is something that I've been able to speak to because I understand their audience really well. I understand the female demographic and the fatigue, shall we say, with the wellness movement and how that's being tied to this, image forward consumerism in a way that's making people much less well than more well. And so I've consulted for them quite a bit on kind of that messaging and that understanding, but then also tactically on social channels and SEO and things like that are some of the things that I bring to the table.
What is for you, where do you see the company in 5 years? So we've more than doubled our audience year over year since the beginning. And part of my vision and dream for The Good Trade is to continue to really rapidly expand our reach and our growth. And I think in that, it's that I want this conversation to continue to be more and more mainstream. My true, what gets me up in the morning and why we all show up every day is a deep and genuine love for our reader and a desire to come alongside them and support them with
whatever they require in order to help their life be more intentional and more inspired. And so, I see the Good Trade in 5 years as certainly the leading resource on sustainable lifestyle content, but also continuing to be like a trusted voice and friend to our reader. And one thing we're really excited to kind of start building out in this next year in 2020 and beyond is taking our digital community and really looking at in-person community, like offline community. What does that look like for us? We've done handfuls of events. They've been really successful for us. Still kind of figuring out like business model for that and what makes sense and what's most conducive to people. Also, LA is hard. LA is a hard city to gather people. And so that's something we're really starting to explore, but it's such a huge need that we're seeing in our readers. There's this really high level of desire for face-to-face community, as organized religion and other types of things the landscape has changed. People are still looking to come together around even specifically, value-based conversations. And so that's something we're excited to explore. I'm not sure what it'll look like in 5 years, but I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves.
No, yeah, I think you're right. I think, there's this desire to put these devices down, right, and have real conversations and have real community. And forming with your network, it seems like a natural sort of extension of what you're doing to sort of bring people together to, number one, so that people can learn from each other, right, and learn what they're doing in their communities to have a better life and lead a more conscious life, and also so you don't feel alone, right, and so you have people in your own community that are thinking the same things and want to have the same sort of, it makes sense. I think we're craving that interaction and in that community.
Yeah. I think that's something I'm thinking a lot about. What does social wellness look like? What does wellness look like, not just for the individual, but together as a part of a community? And I do think, as you're saying, it's a natural evolution of the conversation around sustainability, around ethics, like to be able to swap insights and stories and actually even swap like goods in person, like clothing swaps and things like that, where you're keeping the life cycle of different products moving, but with a really community, like face-to-face kind of interaction. I think is something a lot of our readers have expressed quite a bit of interest around.
Let me ask you this: is your audience mainly women?
Yeah, considerably so. Our audience our web audience is about 80% female, and then our newsletter is almost 100% women. So it's definitely a female-focused, conversation. One thing that I think that's another thing over the next 5 years that we really want to build out our content that is relevant to everyone, everywhere on the gender spectrum, and to really be inclusive of
How do you get men more interested in that conversation? I just can't.
Well, why don't you tell me?
But I'm curious now, because I think it's how do you get?
Yeah, it's been interesting because there are really distinct differences between where men go on our site and where women go on our site. So men search for terms like American made, locally made. Men are like, in terms of the men that are on our site. I don't want to speak generally for men everywhere.
We're not, but I'm not. Yeah, that's not the point of that.
Yeah. I think the interest is around like handmade, crafted goods, American made, local. And so that's been a really exciting place like to start the conversation with men. I think it's still, there are definitely still kind of these gender roles when it comes to household spending. And so, hopefully and probably that will continue to change as gender roles become less binary,
Right.
and more people can be a part of this conversation. But, you know, things like watches, things like denim, product categories like that are definitely where we're seeing the most engagement from men. And I think that's an exciting place to start the conversation.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that locally owned or locally manufactured was important, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting. Learn something new.
Totally.
So the last couple of questions, is there something that you've learned in maybe in a story that you published or that you researched or through your work here that really enlightened you about a problem with a product or a type of product that you can't buy anymore, that just that really changed what you thought about something?
Yeah.
Or a story that you did that really impacted you?
Yeah. You know, I would say the fast fashion category. So really for the work that we've done, both on the investigative side to see like, what does actually look like for a garment worker in Indonesia and, you know, internationally and or even
fast fashion, you mean by like the cheap t-shirts, the cheap stuff that we do in mass and that we just discard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. So by fast fashion, it's fashion that is the life cycle is so short from it's companies that are looking to have new styles out every week or more. And it's a really rapid life cycle of the production process. There's very low transparency around where those garments are being made. And then the purpose of that product is to only wear it, you know, like 1 or 2 or 3 times. And the garments, you know, in fast fashion do break down after 1 or 2 washes in the wash cycle. And so that leads to, you know, a massive impact on climate. So much of these discarded textiles are a huge part of our waste that we produce. But then also the human impact of like, who created that? Did they have breaks in their day? Did they have a living wage? Were they able to eat? Did they have a healthy restroom? You know, that is, so kind of seeing the concerns there. But then also on the flip side, like for us to see behind the scenes in factories like Reformation here in Los Angeles, or Everlane does an excellent job with their factories in China. And there's you know, if we haven't we've been physically to some of those, but they also, both of those companies produce like videos and images of their factories. They tell stories about their garment workers, and there's some accessibility to that. So I think that's really changed my perspective on fashion, and certainly changed like my personal consumption around what I'm, you know, buying or bringing into my home.
What, I know you live the talk, and so, and I think that's amazing that you sort of, you still live in the small house, the tiny house, and
not anymore. We have a little bit bigger. Right. We now have two dogs. One's giant, so we needed, you know, like a little plot of backyard. Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, I think you live the talk that you promote. What's the best advice? The last question: what's the best advice you ever got, and who gave it to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say it would have had to have been from my grandmother or my mother, or another matriarch in my life. You know, I think my grandmother, this was probably very direct advice from her, but also just like watching the way she lived her life, to trust my instincts, to be kind to myself and others, and to lean into the things that I love. There
you go. That's you can't say any better than that. Well, thank you so much, and AmyAnn for this. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you guys for spending some time with us today, whether it's morning on the West Coast or lunchtime over here on the East Coast. We do appreciate it. We've got a great schedule coming up. I've got Joel Solomon from. He's a founding partner of Renewal Funds, Canada's largest venture capital fund. And they invest based on missions. I've got Anuj Shah, who's a doctor. He's the director of the Apex Heart and Vascular Center. He's on tomorrow. I've got Shaman Durek on Friday, and next week I've got Joel Comm to talk about. We're going to talk about cryptocurrency and that movement. So we've just got a great lineup coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to take a break for Christmas and the holidays and be back in the new year. But you can check out the schedule at powerlunch.live. And we'll see you tomorrow. And AmyAnn, thank you so much.